I am 70 years old, a widower, and I thought I had already lived through every betrayal a man can endure. I buried the woman I loved after 40 years together, survived the loneliness that follows an empty house, and learned how to make peace with silence. But nothing, not even death itself, prepared me for the day the woman I trusted most placed a pen in my hand and asked me to sign away my dignity. It was a Tuesday afternoon when it happened. The sun was pouring through the lace curtains of my study, painting the floor in fragile patterns, and she walked in holding a stack of papers with a smile that could melt the stiffest heart. My wife, 30 years younger than me, flawless in her beauty, her perfume lingering in the air like a promise. She kissed my cheek and placed the documents in front of me. "Just some insurance updates," she said, sweetly. "Routine paperwork, nothing to worry about." Her voice carried the softness of concern, and her hands trembled just enough to make me believe she was nervous for my sake. I wanted to believe her. For years I had let myself believe that she was the miracle I didn't deserve. After my first wife died, I thought love was buried with her. And then this young woman appeared in my life, like a light in the middle of the night. She laughed at my old jokes. She said she admired my wisdom, and she told me she wanted nothing more than to take care of me. At my age, when the world sees you as fragile and finished, her affection felt like a resurrection. So when she slid those papers toward me, I almost signed them without reading. Almost. Something in her eyes stopped me. A flicker like the shadow of a storm crossing a clear sky. I pretended to adjust my glasses, pretended to struggle with the small print, while my heart thundered inside my chest. And there, hidden among paragraphs of legal jargon, I saw the truth. It wasn't insurance. It wasn't routine. It was a transfer of ownership. The house where I had raised my children, where my first wife had taken her last breath, was being handed to her with the stroke of my pen. I looked up at her, my hand frozen in midair, the pen hovering above the signature line. She smiled wider, urging me on, as if my hesitation were nothing more than the weakness of old age. In her eyes, I saw it, clearly not love, not devotion, but calculation. She thought she had me trapped, an old fool, blinded by loneliness, ready to give away everything for the illusion of affection. My throat tightened. The air in the room grew heavy, as if the walls themselves leaned in to hear my decision. For a moment I considered confronting her right then, shattering the mask she wore. But I stopped myself. Because if there's one thing life has taught me, it is that battles are not won in a single outburst. They are won in silence, with patience, with strategy. And though she believed I was nothing more than an old man grateful for scraps of attention, she had forgotten one truth about me, a truth I had kept hidden for decades. I was a lawyer once. The thought pulsed through my mind like a secret weapon. I knew contracts, I knew signatures, I knew how fraud looked when it dressed itself up as legality. And more than that, I knew how to wait. She had no idea she had just revealed her hand too soon. But I ask you this. What do you do when the woman who shares your bed turns out to be the thief at your table? What do you do when the lips that kiss you are the same lips planning to erase your name from your own door? I placed the pen down gently, my face unreadable, and told her I would review the papers later. She pouted, pretended to be disappointed, kissed me again, as if nothing had happened. But inside me something irreversible had broken. That night, while she slept beside me with her breathing soft and steady, I stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment of our marriage. Every word, every smile, every gesture. How many of them had been real? How many had been rehearsed lines in a performance meant to strip me of everything I owned? My chest ached not from age, not from illness, but from the weight of betrayal pressing down like a stone. I could have signed that day. I could have surrendered, let her take the house, the money, the years of sacrifice stored in bricks and walls. Many men do. Many old men, desperate for affection, give away their lives to women who see them only as bank accounts. But I am not one of them. This is not just a story about an old man tricked by love. This is a story about the moment I decided I would not be a victim. This is a story about war declared in whispers, about dignity clawed back inch by inch. And it all began with that single piece of paper sliding across my desk, and the realization that the woman I thought was my salvation was in truth my enemy. Before everything collapsed, before the word betrayal was carved into my heart, there was a time when I believed in miracles. I was 68, 2 years a widower, my days structured like clockwork. I woke with the dawn brewed coffee in the same pot my wife once used, read the newspaper cover to cover, and spent afternoons in the garden pulling weeds that never seemed to stop growing. It was a quiet life, and though I told everyone I had grown comfortable with it, the truth was more bitter. The silence of an empty house is not peace. It is an echo that reminds you of everything you've lost. My children lived far away, caught up in their own lives, visiting only on holidays when obligation outweighed convenience. Friends from my youth had either passed away or grown too fragile to meet. And so my evenings stretched long and heavy, filled with the sound of a clock ticking on the wall each second, reminding me I was inching toward an end without witness. I had convinced myself that loneliness was my destiny. That was when she appeared. Her name was Elena, though when she said it, the syllables rolled off her tongue with a kind of musicality, as if even her name was designed to enchant. She was 41 when we met, working at a small art gallery downtown. I had gone there one rainy afternoon more out of boredom than interest. She was standing by a painting explaining brush strokes to a customer, and her laughter rang like bells in the quiet space. When our eyes met, she smiled. Not a polite smile, not the detached kindness people offer an old man, but a smile that seemed to reach into my chest and stir something I thought was long dead. We spoke for a while. She told me she admired men who carried wisdom in their eyes. She asked about my past, and when I mentioned my late wife, she touched my arm gently, whispering, "You must have loved her deeply. That's beautiful." In that moment, her compassion felt like oxygen. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. Our meetings became frequent. Coffee at the gallery cafe, long walks where she listened to my stories as if they mattered, dinners where she laughed at jokes that even I had stopped finding funny. My neighbors began to notice. "You look 10 years younger," one of them told me. And perhaps I did. Loneliness had carved wrinkles on my face, deeper than age ever could, but with her, those lines softened. When Elena stepped into my home for the first time, she admired everything with awe. She ran her fingers across the bookshelf, paused at family photographs, and touched the dining table as though it was a sacred artifact. "You built such a beautiful life," she said. I'd be honored to be a part of it. I believed her. How could I not? In her presence, the house no longer felt like a mausoleum of memories. It breathed again. Months passed, and she slipped seamlessly into my routines. She brewed coffee before I woke, filled the garden with flowers I had never planted before, and hummed while cooking, as if she had always belonged to the kitchen. For the first time since my wife's passing, I felt something close to joy. My children, however, were cautious. They called her too young, too perfect, too sudden. My daughter whispered one night on the phone, "Dad, are you sure she loves you for you, and not for something else?" I dismissed the thought. It felt cruel to reduce her tenderness to suspicion. Didn't I deserve this second chance? Didn't I deserve to be seen as a man, not just an aging relic waiting for death? The proposal wasn't extravagant. I asked her one quiet evening in the garden while we watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of fire. "Elena," I said, voice trembling, "would you give an old man the honor of spending the rest of his life with you?" She gasped, her hands covering her mouth, tears glistening in her eyes. She said yes, not once, but 3 times each louder than the last, as if to erase any doubt. And in that instant, I felt reborn. Our wedding was intimate, just close family and a handful of friends. She looked radiant in white, her beauty turning heads, while I stood beside her with a chest so full it ached. When we exchanged vows, she whispered, "I will take care of you always. You are my safe place." Those words became the foundation of my new life. For 2 years, she played her role flawlessly. She held my hand at doctor's appointments, reminded me to take my medicine, filled my calendar with small joys, concerts, art shows, dinners with her friends who treated me with polite respect. I thought I had been gifted a second youth. I thought fate had smiled on me after years of grief. Looking back now, I wonder when the performance began. Was it at the gallery when she first noticed the watch on my wrist and the way my shoes gleamed with the polish of an expensive brand? Was it the day she stepped into my house, calculating the worth of every painting, every piece of furniture, while I mistook her wonder for admiration? Or was it later when she learned about my savings, my investments, my will? At the time, I saw none of it. I only saw the woman who laughed with me, who brought life into my fading days, who leaned her head on my shoulder as though I was still strong enough to carry her weight. I wanted to believe in her because believing gave me purpose. I was not just surviving anymore, I was living. And maybe that is the cruelest part of betrayal. Not the act itself, but the memory of how beautiful everything seemed before the mask slipped. Because when you lose that, you don't just lose a person. You lose the version of yourself that dared to hope again. The first cracks in our perfect picture came so quietly that I almost convinced myself they didn't exist. It was a Wednesday evening when I noticed her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize, followed by a string of messages she quickly grabbed and hid from sight the moment I stepped closer. She smiled, brushed it off with a laugh, and said it was just a friend from the gallery. I told myself not to be paranoid. After all, she was younger, her world more vibrant, her connections far wider than mine. Who was I to question a simple text? But once you see a shadow, you can't unsee it. I began to notice her disappearing into the other room to take calls, her voice dropping into a whisper. When I asked who it was, she would shrug, sometimes roll her eyes, and remind me that not everything had to be explained. "Don't be jealous, darling," she would say, kissing my cheek to seal the conversation shut. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew in silence. Money was the next sign. My accounts, which had always been steady, began to drain faster than usual. Small withdrawals at first, amounts so insignificant I almost didn't notice. But then came larger transactions, thousands disappearing in the span of days. When I asked her about it, she explained it away with practiced ease. "I've been investing for us. You'll see in a year we'll have double." Her eyes sparkled with excitement, her hands wrapping around mine, as though her love itself was collateral. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I did. She started bringing home new clothes, jewelry designer bags. Discounts, she would say, or gifts from a friend. I remembered my late wife, who never cared for such things, who wore the same simple pearl earrings for decades. The contrast cut deep, but I swallowed the unease because Elena would laugh and twirl in front of the mirror, asking if I thought she looked beautiful. And of course I did. Of course I told her so. There were nights she didn't come home until late, claiming she had been helping a friend in crisis. Once, when I pressed for details, she grew defensive, her voice sharp as a blade. "Why don't you trust me? After everything I've given up for you after marrying a man twice my age, you think I'd betray you?" Her words pierced me with guilt, and I retreated ashamed of my suspicion. I told myself I was being unfair, insecure, trapped in the mindset of an old man afraid of losing what little he had left. Friends tried to warn me. At a dinner one evening, a longtime neighbor leaned close and whispered, "She's too good to be true." Be careful, old friend. I laughed it off, defended her fiercely, and accused them of envy. How blind I was, protecting the very person who was slowly bleeding me dry. The red flags multiplied. She insisted on handling all the bills, the taxes, the paperwork. "You shouldn't stress at your age," she said, her tone sugary, her hands already collecting the envelopes before I could protest. She even suggested we merge our accounts, so everything feels truly ours. And though a voice deep inside me screamed in warning, I silenced it with the thought that maybe this was what trust looked like. Maybe love meant surrendering control, but there were moments I couldn't ignore. One evening, as she thought I was asleep, I heard her pacing the living room, her voice low but urgent on the phone. "He'll sign soon," she whispered. "Don't worry, I've got it under control. My blood ran cold." The words replayed in my mind over and over until sleep was impossible. The next morning she was radiant as ever, cooking breakfast, humming softly, placing a plate in front of me as though nothing had happened. And still I said nothing. Perhaps it was pride that kept me silent. Perhaps it was fear of admitting that I had been fooled, that my children had been right, that the love I clung to was nothing more than a performance. I told myself I needed more proof, that I couldn't confront her with only fragments of suspicion. But the truth was simpler. I wasn't ready to let go of the illusion. The worst wound was not financial. It was emotional. I began to notice the way her eyes wandered when younger men were around, the way her laughter was louder, brighter in their company than it ever was with me. Once at a dinner party, I caught her hand lingering on the arm of a man across the table. When she saw me watching, she withdrew, quickly smiling as though daring me to challenge her. I said nothing, but the humiliation burned through me. I tried to push these doubts aside. I told myself every marriage has imperfections, that perhaps I was overanalyzing because of my age. But the cracks widened, and with each one, the truth screamed louder. Something was terribly wrong. I was living with a stranger who wore the mask of a wife, a stranger who looked at me not as a partner, but as a stepping stone. And yet despite every sign, every whispered conversation, every unexplained withdrawal, I remained silent. Because deep down I hoped I was wrong. I hoped she would prove me paranoid. I hoped the love I believed in was still real. But hope, I would soon learn, is the most dangerous lie we tell ourselves. I remember the exact moment when the illusion cracked beyond repair. It was a Sunday morning, the kind of morning my late wife used to cherish, with sunlight spilling across the dining table and the smell of fresh coffee rising in the air. Elena had left in a hurry, saying she was meeting a friend at the gallery. I was alone in the house, restless, unable to shake the unease that had been gnawing at me for weeks. Something inside whispered that I needed to stop pretending that I had to look for answers, even if I feared what I might find. I went into her study, a room she insisted on keeping private. She always claimed it was her creative sanctuary, filled with sketches, notes, and little fragments of inspiration. I had respected her space, believing that love meant boundaries. But that morning, respect gave way to suspicion, and suspicion led me to the desk drawer she always kept locked. I found the spare key taped beneath the wooden shelf. My hands trembled as I turned the lock, half expecting to find nothing but paper and pencils. What I discovered instead stole the breath from my chest. Neatly stacked inside were documents, legal documents with my name on them. Property transfer forms, bank authorizations, even a draft of a power of attorney. And at the bottom of the pile, a will. My will. Only it wasn't the one I had written years ago with my children as beneficiaries. This one was freshly printed naming Elena as the sole heir to everything I owned. I stared at the pages, my vision blurring, my heart pounding like a war drum. My hands traced the forged signature, my name copied with uncanny precision. She had been planning this, orchestrating every step, waiting for the moment to strip me of everything I had built in 70 years of life. My house, my savings, my dignity, all of it funneled into her hands. I sank into the chair, the papers scattered on the floor around me like shards of glass. Questions stormed my mind. Who had helped her? How long had this been going on? Had every kiss, every whispered "I love you" been a rehearsal for betrayal? The woman I had defended against friends and family was not my wife. She was a predator, and I was her prey. As I tried to steady my breath, a detail caught my eye, a business card tucked inside the folder. A lawyer's card, someone I didn't know specializing in estate planning. My blood ran cold as I remembered the late-night calls, the whispered promises I had overheard. He'll sign soon. That's what she had meant. She was counting on my trust, my blindness, my love to sign away everything willingly. Rage rose inside me, hot and consuming, but beneath it was something sharper, clarity. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I saw the truth without excuses. She hadn't married me for companionship or love. She had married me for access, for inheritance, for power. And she thought she was clever enough to pull it off without me noticing. But she had forgotten one thing. I was not just some frail old man waiting to die. I was once a lawyer. I had spent decades in courtrooms studying deception, unraveling lies, exposing fraud. My memory for the law had grown dusty with time, but it had never disappeared. And now her arrogance had handed me every weapon I needed. That afternoon I did not confront her. No, that would have been too easy, too expected. Instead, I quietly gathered the papers, photographed every page, and returned them to the drawer as though untouched. I contacted an old colleague, someone I trusted, someone who owed me a favor. I told him everything. His silence on the other end of the phone was long and heavy, but when he finally spoke, his words were steady. You need to be careful. If she's gone this far, she won't stop until she has it all. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Then let her think she's winning, I said. The bigger the lie she builds, the harder it will collapse when the truth comes out. That evening, Elena returned, her perfume filling the house, her laughter light, as she told me about the friend she had met. I watched her move, every gesture calculated, every smile rehearsed. And for the first time, I wasn't blinded by her beauty. I saw her mask, and I knew what hid behind it. The early twist of betrayal was no longer just suspicion. It was proof black and white, with forged ink and stolen trust. The woman who had sworn to stand by me was preparing to erase me, to rewrite my life as though I had never existed. And yet I felt no despair, because now I held the truth. Now I had the advantage. But she didn't know that. She still believed I was blind, naive, weak. She still believed she had me cornered. And so I let her believe it. Because the game was no longer hers alone, it was mine. And I was ready to play. The days that followed were like walking a tightrope over a pit of fire. Every word, every glance, every touch with Elena carried the weight of knowledge I could not reveal. I would wake in the night and hear her whispering into her phone hushed conversations that ended abruptly when she noticed I had stirred. By morning, she would play the devoted wife again, preparing my coffee, smiling as if nothing had changed. But I knew better. And still I said nothing. I let her believe she was safe. I let her believe she had fooled me, because the more secure she felt, the more careless she became. The first escalation came in the form of a visit from a notary. A stranger at my door, briefcase in hand, papers neatly stacked. Elena hovered close as he explained that he had come to witness my signature on some simple property updates. Her hand brushed my arm, her voice dripping with sweetness, as she encouraged me to sign quickly so we can finally stop worrying about all this paperwork. I looked her dead in the eyes, smiled, and said, "Of course, my love. But I'll review everything with my lawyer first." The color drained from her face for the briefest second, but she recovered with a laugh, telling the notary we would reschedule. After he left, her smile turned brittle. "Why do you have to complicate everything?" she asked. I shrugged, playing the fool. Old habits die hard. She didn't press further, but I could feel her suspicion gnawing at me. Then came the rumors. Neighbors I had known for years began looking at me strangely. A friend at the cafe leaned over one morning and whispered, "I heard you're not well, that you've been forgetting things." My blood ran cold. I asked where he had heard it, and he hesitated before saying, "Your wife mentioned it. She's worried about you." Worried. That word was poison in my ears. She was laying the groundwork, preparing the world to believe I was losing my mind. Every misstep, every forgotten name or misplaced key became fuel for her narrative. Once, when I couldn't find my glasses, she shook her head with exaggerated sadness and said, "It happens, darling. At your age, it's natural." But the gleam in her eyes betrayed her. She wasn't comforting me. She was building a case. I began to document everything. Every withdrawal. Every conversation, every lie. My old habits as a lawyer returned with ruthless precision. I recorded her late-night calls when I could saved receipts she tried to discard, made copies of the documents I had found in her drawer. It became my obsession, my secret rebellion. She thought she was hunting me, but I was building the net that would one day trap her. Still, the attacks grew bolder. One afternoon, I received a call from the bank asking to confirm a request to transfer a large sum to an account I had never seen. Elena stood behind me, her hand on my shoulder, smiling sweetly, as if daring me to object. "No," I told the banker firmly. "I did not authorize that." Her smile faltered, her fingers digging into my shoulder. When I hung up, she hissed, "Do you want to humiliate me? Do you want people to think I'm a thief?" I looked at her steady and calm. "If you don't want to be thought of as a thief, don't act like one." For a moment her mask slipped, and I saw the fury beneath, raw and unrestrained. But just as quickly she covered it with laughter. "You're tired," she said. "Rest, my love." And then she left the room before I could respond. That night she didn't come home. I waited in the dark, my chest tight with anger and fear, until I finally heard the door creak open after midnight. She smelled of perfume. I didn't recognize her lipstick smudged. She moved quietly, perhaps hoping I was asleep. I lay in bed, eyes closed, listening to the sound of her slipping off her heels, her laughter still echoing faintly from the night. And in that moment, the truth was undeniable. She wasn't just stealing my money, she was stealing my life piece by piece, night by night. The escalation wasn't only in whispers and lies, it became war. She cornered me at breakfast one morning, her voice sharp as a blade. "If you love me, you'll sign. You'll make it official. Otherwise, what's the point of this marriage?" I set down my coffee, my hand steady though my heart raced. "If love depends on signatures, it isn't love. It's business." And I didn't marry a business partner. Her eyes narrowed, her smile twisting into something cold. "Careful," she said softly. "You don't want to push me. Push her." The irony was cruel. She had been pushing me towards the edge of ruin for months, and now she dared to threaten me for resisting. I realized then that we had crossed a line. There would be no return to peace, no gentle reconciliation. This was no longer a marriage. This was a battlefield. And yet I couldn't simply throw her out, not without proof, not without strategy. She had already sown seeds of doubt about my sanity. If I acted rashly, she would use it against me. She would spin the story until I was the villain, the bitter old man who couldn't handle being loved by a younger woman. No, I needed patience. I needed timing. But patience is not without cost. Every day became a torment. I saw the way she looked at me, calculating, measuring how much longer she had to play the role before the harvest. I saw the way she charmed my friends, winning their sympathy, painting herself as the devoted wife, burdened with an aging husband slipping into confusion. And worst of all, I saw the way she lived freely with my money-parading luxuries I had never agreed to buy, laughing in places I was never invited. The breaking point came when I overheard her speaking, not to a friend, not to a lawyer, but to another man. I had followed the sound of her voice to the back garden, where she stood beneath the moonlight phone pressed to her ear. Yes, she whispered, her tone soft, almost intimate. It won't be long now. Once everything is in my name, we'll be free. He doesn't suspect a thing. The words pierced me like a knife. Not only was she planning to steal my fortune, she was planning to leave me for another man the moment it was done. My knees weakened, my breath caught in my throat. I clutched the wall for balance, rage and despair warring inside me. But then a strange calm settled over me, because now I knew the full extent of her betrayal, and knowing gave me power. When she returned inside, I was sitting at the table waiting. She smiled at me, kissed my cheek, asked if I wanted tea. I looked at her, really looked, and realized that the woman I had once believed was my salvation had become my executioner. But I would not let her succeed. Escalation had turned my home into a prison, my marriage into a war. But wars are not won by rage alone. They are won by strategy. And as she drifted upstairs, humming softly, unaware that her secret was no longer hers, I felt the old fire return. The fire of a man who had once fought and won in courtrooms, who had outwitted liars and deceivers for decades. She thought I was finished. She thought I was hers to devour. She had no idea I was just beginning. I had been patient. Too patient. Weeks of silence, of watching her weave her web, of letting her believe she had me cornered, it had all led to this. My evidence was complete, my plan ready. But nothing, not even decades in the courtroom, could have prepared me for the storm that was about to break inside my own home. It was a Thursday evening when the final push came. Elena walked in her heels, clicking across the hardwood floor, her perfume flooding the air. She looked stunning deliberately, so her hair perfect, her dress clinging in all the ways she knew would distract me. She held a folder in her hands and dropped it onto the table with a sharp thud. "It's time," she said, her voice firm, stripped of the sweetness she usually feigned. "No more delays, no more excuses. Sign these papers." I glanced at the folder. Property transfer. Bank access. The same documents I had found hidden in her drawer weeks earlier, only now they bore a notary's stamp and neatly highlighted spaces for my signature. She stood over me, not as a wife, not even as a partner, but as a conqueror demanding the spoils of war. For a moment, I let the silence stretch between us, my heart pounding. Then I looked up at her, calm, deliberate, and asked, "What happens after I sign Elena? Do I get a thank you, a kiss? Or do I simply disappear into the shadows, while you enjoy the fruits of your victory?" Her eyes narrowed. "Don't play games with me. You know what this means. It means security for both of us. It means no more stress about the future." "No," I said quietly, pushing the folder back toward her. "It means the end of me. And that was your plan all along, wasn't it?" The mask slipped. For the first time, she didn't bother to deny it. She leaned closer, her eyes burning with something cruel. "You think I wanted to spend my life with a relic? You think this—" She gestured at me with disdain, "was my dream. Don't fool yourself. You were a stepping stone, nothing more. And now you're in the way." Her words cut deeper than any blade could. I had suspected, I had overheard, I had found evidence, But to hear her admit it, to spit it in my face, was a wound I hadn't braced for. I forced myself not to flinch, not to let her see the devastation ripping through me. Instead, I reached beneath the table and placed a small recorder on the wood. With one click, her own words replayed in the silence of the room. "Once everything is in my name, we'll be free." He doesn't suspect a thing. Her face drained of color. She lunged forward, slamming her hand onto the recorder. "You sneaky old bastard," she hissed. I stood, my voice rising for the first time in months. "You thought I was blind, Elena. You thought age had made me weak, forgetful, easy to control. But you forgot who I am. I spent a lifetime dismantling liars like you. And now I have every word, every forgery, every stolen cent documented." Her fury ignited, raw and explosive. "You think anyone will believe you? You're old. You stumble. You forget things. Half the neighborhood already thinks you're losing it because I made them think that." "And that," I said, pointing at her, "is exactly why they'll believe me now. Because you went too far. You tried to erase me before I was gone. But I'm still here. And I'm not going quietly." She threw the folder across the room, papers scattering like snow in a storm. "You'll regret this. You'll end up alone without me, without your children, without anyone to care for you." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsher than I expected. "Alone, better alone with dignity than chained to a viper. You mistake my silence for weakness. But silence was my strategy. Now it's over." At that moment, the front door opened. My son stepped inside, summoned by the message I had sent earlier telling him it was time he saw the truth with his own eyes. He froze, staring at the chaos, the scattered documents, the fury in Elena's face, the recorder still glowing red on the table. "Dad?" he asked, his voice uncertain. Elena spun toward him, her tone instantly soft, desperate. "She's lying," she began her words, stumbling. "Your father? He's confused, he's paranoid, he doesn't know what he's saying." I picked up the recorder, pressed play again. Her voice filled the room, undeniable, inescapable. My son's face hardened as the truth clawed its way into him. He turned to Elena, his eyes blazing. "You used him. You used all of us." Elena's desperation twisted into rage. "Fine," she screamed. "Yes, I used him, because he let me, because he was pathetic enough to believe a woman half his age wanted him for love. He handed me everything and I took it. And I'd do it again." The words echoed through the house, venomous, final. I rose, my body shaking, but my voice steady. "Then hear me now, Elena. You are finished. In this house, in my life, in my story, you are finished." For a moment the room was silent, except for her ragged breathing. Then she grabbed her purse, her heels striking like hammers, as she stormed out the door, slamming it so hard the windows rattled. The silence that followed was deafening. My son looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of pity, anger, and something else, respect. For the first time in years, he saw me not as a frail old man clinging to illusions, but as someone who had stood up, who had fought back. I sat heavily in my chair, the adrenaline draining from my veins. My hands trembled not from weakness, but from release. Months of fear, doubt, humiliation, all of it had erupted in one explosive confrontation. And though the war was not yet over, the battlefield had shifted. The mask was gone. The truth was out. The woman who thought she could erase me had revealed herself instead. And in doing so, she had given me the greatest weapon of all, her own words, her own arrogance, her own downfall. The climax had come, brutal and unforgiving, but necessary. For the first time in a long time, I felt the weight lift. I had not been destroyed. I had not been erased. I was still here, and the fight was mine to finish. The days after her departure were strangely quiet, as if the house itself had exhaled for the first time in years. No more late-night whispers on the phone, no more unfamiliar perfumes lingering in the hallway, no more demands disguised as affection. Only silence, thick and heavy, but mine. I had feared silence for so long, believing it meant loneliness, but now I realized it was something different. It was freedom. My son, shaken but resolute, helped me piece the evidence together. The recordings, the forged documents, the bank statements, all of it formed a chain too strong for her to deny. My old colleague took the case with a grim smile, promising me that predators like her always think they're smarter than they are. Within weeks, we filed charges. Fraud, forgery, financial abuse. Words that carried the weight of justice, words she could not laugh away. Elena tried, of course. She arrived at the first hearing draped in elegance crocodile tears shining under the courtroom lights. She painted herself as the victim of an unstable old man, claimed I had been manipulated by jealous children, argued that everything she had done was out of love. But her own voice betrayed her. When the recorder played, her words filled the courtroom like poison released from a bottle. Once everything is in my name, we'll be free. He doesn't suspect a thing. No amount of false tears could wash that away. The judge's ruling was swift and merciless. The forged documents were nullified. My accounts were restored. Elena was barred from contacting me, from stepping foot in my home, from circling my life like a vulture ever again. She left the courthouse that day not as the triumphant widow-to-be, but as an exposed fraud. Her mask shattered her reputation in ruins. I would be lying if I said victory tasted sweet. It didn't. It was bitter-edged with sorrow, because no matter how much I had won, I still carried the scars. I had loved her once, or at least I had loved the image of her I wanted to believe in. And losing even an illusion leaves a mark. But beneath the sorrow was something stronger, dignity. I had protected the life I built, not just the money, not just the house, but the part of myself that refused to be erased. She thought she could rewrite my story, but I had taken the pen back. My children, once skeptical, once distant, began to look at me differently. They no longer saw a man blinded by foolish love, but a father who had fought back, who had chosen truth over comfort. My son came to me one evening, sitting across from me at the old wooden table, his voice soft. "Dad, I'm proud of you. You showed me it's never too late to stand up." His words cut through years of tension, and for the first time since his mother's passing, I felt the bond between us begin to mend. Life did not return to what it had been before Elena. It never could. But it became something else, something steadier. I learned to sit with the silence and not fear it. I learned to tend the garden again, to let the roses bloom without imagining who else might enjoy them. I learned that even in my 70s, even with the weight of age on my shoulders, I still had the strength to fight for myself. Sometimes late at night I wonder where she went. I imagine her drifting from city to city, chasing another fortune, weaving another story for another lonely man. Perhaps she'll succeed again. Perhaps she won't. But I no longer care, because her story is no longer mine. Mine is a story of survival, of betrayal faced and dignity reclaimed, of learning too late but not too late that love without respect is nothing but a cage. And if you're listening to this now, I ask you, have you ever ignored the red flags in your own life? Have you ever chosen illusion over truth because the truth hurt too much to face? We all do it at one time or another. But the moment you open your eyes, the moment you say no, you take back power. They thought they had stolen forever. I lost a woman, yes. I lost the fantasy of companionship. But I gained something no one can ever steal again: my freedom, my dignity, and the certainty that even when the world thinks you're finished, you can still rise, still fight, still win. This is my confession, my war, my victory. And now I turn to you. Tell me, if you were in my place, would you have signed the papers, or would you have fought back, even if it meant standing alone? Leave your answer in the comments I'll be reading, because sometimes sharing the truth is the only way to make sure it isn't forgotten.